This is the story of how canals changed and shaped our modern world. Carrying huge volumes of goods and fuel, they were a stimulus to Britain's great industrial revolution.
But they also gave us much, much more, and their legacy lives on today in surprising ways. My name's Liz McIvor, and I've spent my life studying and talking about history. And now I think it's time for us to take a different look at our inland waterways.
Back in the late 1700s, carving up our landscape with canals brought to light fresh discoveries about the earth below. The new waterways gave us clues into the mysteries of our planet's creation, decades before Darwin's theories took hold.
So how did this happen? How did canal building give us a deeper understanding of the earth and help create the new science of geology?
Just off London's Piccadilly, behind the doorway of the Geological Society, is a very special and very important document. One which had a profound effect on our economic growth, our scientific knowledge, and our understanding of our planet. And amazingly, it's all the work of just one man. This map had its origins some 100 or so miles to the west of here in Somerset. And to understand how it was created and why it's so significant, we need to return to a time when canals were being carved through the British landscape. This is the Kennet and Avon, 87 miles long and one of the jewels of Britain's canal network.
Getting this canal built was a seriously tough challenge, and it was partly down to the fact that geological knowledge was so limited at the time.
The canal was given the go-ahead during the period of frenzied building in the 1790s, known as Canal Mania. By linking the Kennet navigation at Newbury with the Avon at Bath, it would open up a route between London and Bristol. Horse-drawn barges would be able to get between the cities in just 10 days, potentially halving the transport costs by road. The man hired to plot the route and oversee construction of the new canal was a rising star of civil engineering, the Scotsman John Rennie. However, he only had limited experience of canal building. Construction work got underway in October 1794 when the first sod was cut at Bradford-on-Avon, 6 miles to the east of Bath. In time, the wharves here would handle the canal's main cargoes: coal, grain and Bath stone.
The stretch of canal from Bradford-on-Avon to Bath provides a fantastic location for pleasure boaters today. But for John Rennie and his construction teams in the 1790s, the local landscape proved a major headache.
Geologist Dr. Janet Sumner understands all about the treacherous lie of the land in this part of the world.
The rocks in this area consist of limestone, which was laid down in shallow tropical seas, sandstone and layers of shale and mud. Now, the sandstone and the limestone are really hard but permeable rocks, which wouldn't be a problem but for the layers of mud. And what happens is one particular layer that they call fuller's earth, which is a type of clay, when the water reached the fuller's earth layer, it couldn't get through, it was impermeable. So it waterlogged the clay and it turned it into something with the consistency of like tomato ketchup, which meant that the overlying layers of sandstone and limestone simply used it as a lubricant and just slid down into the cutting in a series of huge landslides.
What kind of damage are we talking about?
Well, in terms of scale, you know, there's an estimate, the equivalent of an area of 7 football pitches came sliding down the side into the canal cuts. And that meant that on this stretch, parts of the canal had to be repeatedly drained and then shored up with planks.
The damage caused by the area's unstable geology had big cost implications for the canal. In 1800, Rennie reported that the landslips and other expenses would add more than £270,000 to the bill. With the science of geology still very much in its infancy, early canal engineers like Rennie really were flying blind.
The basic problem that they had, Liz, was they didn't have a geological map. They had no idea about the different types of rocks and how the rocks were lying, and they really needed a map. But they hadn't got one. All they got was information from things like boreholes, which in some cases were miles apart. So they knew nothing about the geology in between. So the canal building crews frequently encountered problems like the landslips, natural springs, hitting hard rock that needed blasting, having to dig tunnels that they thought perhaps would have been through earth and then finding out that they're chipping through solid rock. So there were lots of problems like that all added time and expense to the bill.
In spite of the challenges of the landscape, Rennie and his teams of navvies forged on, and the Kennet and Avon began to take shape. But more geological problems lay in wait. To the west of Bradford, Rennie constructed an impressive aqueduct at Avon, but it was blighted by poor construction materials.
John Rennie wanted to build the aqueduct in brick, but the canal company overruled him and insisted on Bath stone. They wanted local quarry owners to feel obliged to use the canal to transport their goods. But Rennie later regretted not putting his foot down. Bath stone looks lovely, but it becomes easily frost damaged if not properly treated after quarrying.
As soon as the aqueduct was completed in 1801, its central arch started sagging. And not surprisingly, the whole structure has had to be repaired many times over the years, with bricks helping to shore up the damaged stone. All these problems started taking their toll, and Rennie's canal dream threatened to turn into a nightmare. But was his luck about to change for the better?
The truth of the matter was that the early canal builders had very little clue about what they would encounter when digging their trenches and tunnels. A lot was left to chance. Sometimes it would be slips and leaks, but at other times they'd get lucky and a fluke of geology would lend a helping hand.
And that's exactly what happened here at Cane Hill, just outside the important trading centre of Devizes. For the canal to climb the hill, Rennie planned a series of 29 locks, and the dramatic central section of these is one of the steepest flights on the whole canal network.
The reason that the locks are here is because here you're climbing up the green sand, up to the level of Salisbury Plain and then the chalklands beyond. And that's why there's such a steep flight.
Because of Cane Hill's steepness, there wasn't space to use the normal arrangement of water chambers between the locks. So Rennie had to build unusually large side ponds to replenish the water in each lock after use. Unlike on the Bradford stretch, this time fortune favoured the bold, and the canal builders had a stroke of good geological luck.
They were building the canal, and halfway up on the right-hand side, they found clay, galt clay, which is absolutely fantastic for brickmaking. And they'd hit a real problem with the canal because lots of the locks were built of stone, but that was suffering very badly from frost. So they switched to bricks. So they established a brickworks just up there on the right-hand side. And it was a major undertaking because not only were they using bricks in the flight of locks that you can see, but also 15 miles to the east, they were building a tunnel called the Bruce Tunnel. The landowner, the Earl of Aylesbury, he was happy for the canal to go through, but he didn't want to be able to see it. So they had to build a tunnel. And they used over 2 million bricks in its construction. It's absolutely incredible.
And it's an incredibly expensive way to hide a piece of engineering, isn't it? It was very much a case of not in my backyard, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Nothing changes.
How long were the brickworks open for?
It was actually open into the 1960s, and there were sort of still people around who worked there. Of course, it's left its legacy throughout Devizes with the handmade bricks that are still in many buildings in the town today.
The clay bricks were a big help in getting the canal up Cane Hill and then under the Earl of Aylesbury's estate. But Rennie encountered another problem further to the east at Crofton, the Kennet and Avon's highest point. There was no natural water supply to feed the summit of the canal, and it looked as if another expensive tunnel would be required. But instead, Rennie decided to use a huge pump to keep the canal topped up.
We're going through limestone here, quite different to Cane Hill, so he had a geological challenge here, how to get water to the top level where the rock is porous and there was no natural supply up there. And behind us over here is the pumping station where the oldest beam engine in the world, the Bolton and Watt beam engine, draws water up in this gigantic piston. Each draw draws 1 tonne of water each time it rotates, and that lifts water up just under 50 foot up to the highest point in the canal.
The steam-powered pump could keep the summit topped up, but it still needed to be fed by a water supply at its base. Once again, though, Rennie struck lucky, this time by finding some springs nearby.
The canal didn't supply enough water for what he needed on its own, because you've got to keep the canal in water as well as taking water out of it. So he then built a reservoir, and the springs fed the reservoir, and that provided sufficient backup volume of water to keep the whole system working.
The Crofton pumping station was completed in 1809, allowing the Kennet and Avon Canal to open for business the following year. Rennie may have found solutions to all the engineering challenges the landscape had posed, but the Kennet and Avon had still taken 16 years to complete, at a final cost of almost £1 million, more than 4 times its original estimate. But even though geology presented canal builders with major stumbling blocks, it's worth remembering that some canals were only ever built because of the local geology and the minerals to be found within the landscape. 100 miles to the north of Bath, the Dudley Canal Tunnel in the West Midlands Black Country is a labyrinth of over 3 miles of underground passageways. They were carved out in the 1770s to transport limestone, which was being mined to feed the new blast furnaces of the Industrial Revolution. The canal linked the mines to the wider national waterways network.
Limestone was a really useful rock. It was used as a flux for smelting iron, which made the iron a lot purer. It was used for agricultural reasons. They used to spread it on fields. It was also turned into quicklime and put into things like lime mortar, which created a waterproof mortar that they could use in building canals, in fact. So there were lots of uses for limestone, which made it one of the key ingredients, really, of the Industrial Revolution.
Exploiting the limestone rock seams may have been the whole purpose of the Dudley Canal, but, as with many other canals of the era, patchy geological knowledge left construction teams literally stumbling in the dark.
The construction of the tunnel was long and laborious, a very difficult job. It involved digging out the rock with hand tools, pickaxes, things like that. They constructed the tunnel by sinking construction shafts down from the surface, and then when they got to the bottom, went out in 2 directions with miners going each way, and then they met up. Hopefully, sometimes better than others. There's a few kinks in the tunnel where they didn't quite get it right. And of course, they were digging through completely foreign geology. They had no idea what they were going to encounter. As well as the limestone, which was what they were looking for, there are various volcanic rocks down under here, muds, shales, all sorts of things that meant that the terrain for them underground was very variable, and they could go from a very soft rock one minute to a very hard, difficult rock the next.
Right, now the tunnel we're going into is the second longest canal tunnel.
Despite these geological challenges, the canal tunnel became a big success once it was built. In 1853 alone, more than 41,000 boats carried limestone through these tunnels from the caves.
At its height, these mines would have been absolutely packed with people, miners at the rock faces digging away the limestone, others loading the boats. You were talking about 10 boats an hour running through the tunnel, so it would have been really busy, sort of like the motorway of its time.
The Dudley Canal Tunnel may have been a triumph, but other canals were nearly ruined by unexpected geological problems. It took 8 years and 3 attempts to complete the Blisworth Tunnel in Northamptonshire. Test boreholes failed to detect a dip in the strata that created an underground reservoir, causing serious flooding. And navvies on the Harecastle Tunnel in Staffordshire spent 9 long years inching slowly through everything from hard granite and millstone grit to treacherous quicksand.
The fact that the early canal engineers had such a basic grasp of geology was a big drawback. But one canal man was about to unlock the secrets of the rocks beneath our feet. Secrets which would in time transform our entire understanding of the planet.
William Smith was the son of an Oxfordshire village blacksmith who taught himself surveying as a teenager. He may have come from humble beginnings with limited formal education, but he had a real knack for reading the landscape. In 1793, while still in his early 20s, he was hired by the Kennet and Avon's engineer, John Rennie, to work as the surveyor for a new waterway linking the main canal to a fresh coalfield in Somerset.
This is the Dundas Aqueduct. And it's over there at the Dundas Basin where the Somersetshire Coal Canal joins the Kennet and Avon. Particularly important because coal made up the lion's share of the Kennet and Avon's traffic.
The coal canal has been long abandoned and parts have been redeveloped and filled in. Much of the course of the canal can still be traced though, and this is the route that William Smith devised back in 1794. Professor Hugh Torrens is one of the world's leading experts on Smith's life and first explored the landscape around Bath as an undergraduate geologist in the 1950s.
Is this the type of thing that William Smith would have used to survey the Somersetshire Coal Canal?
Yeah, a theodolite. It's a horizontometer trying to measure exact horizontality. This is a later model of the sort of thing that was standard fare. Beautifully made, beautifully adjustable, fantastic piece of equipment. And of course the crucial thing about canals with this wonderful series of locks we're going through is that you can't make water run uphill or downhill. You have to have it absolutely horizontal. So it was a very interesting early experiment for Smith. He was a land surveyor and I think was very good at basically the lie of a land, and they plotted the entire topography of this beautiful part of the world. Most of it would have been on foot, just walking, measuring, surveying, with an assistant to check the other end was a horizontal measurement. You need somebody to hold a board up or a sight up. And I think the fact that these locks are built so beautifully is a proof of their achievement.
The excavation of the coal canal from 1795 gave Smith an opportunity to test theories about rock strata that he'd been developing while looking at coal seams. By cutting open a long slice of the Somerset countryside, he would be able to see exactly how layers of rock were lying underneath the ground.
He realised that there was an order of the strata of the rocks you're in. This is a clay unit we're in here, above it's a limestone, and so you can put them in an order or a sequence. And when he was asked by people what he discovered and trying to get across the complexity of geology and new science, he used the analogy of bread and butter. He used to get a pound of bread and slice it up and then put them in layers and tip them over and say this is what the rock strata are like. And it's the same with geology. And in his ordering of strata, he actually alphabetized 22 rocks in the Bath area. The top one was the chalk, the bottom one was the coal. Where would we be indexing books or knowledge without an alphabet, knowing where letter A is and how letter L relates to it? For the first time in English history, and probably other countries' history, it was the first time the rocks had been ordered.
It's really atmospheric, isn't it, to be able to walk through this old canal and look at the weathering and the damage to the stonework.
Yes, one forgets how intense the building of the thing was. You have the remains of the lock gates here with these big oak doors and the pins, wrought iron pins to prove it. And this is 210 years since it was opened in 1805, so it's an incredible achievement.
As well as showing Smith how the rock layers were ordered, building the coal canal gave him an opportunity to gather fossil specimens, which he realised were the key to identifying exactly which strata rocks were part of.
The important thing about the rocks are, these are Bath oolite, great oolite. These rocks have fossils in them. And of course he was collecting fossils all the time he was building the canal. And as you go up and down the rock strata, you see some are rich in fossils, some are not rich in fossils. But it means as soon as you find a fossil, you can place it in your sequential order and identify the stratum that you've reached.
The fossils that Smith unearthed while the coal canal was being dug can still be seen at the Natural History Museum in London.
The fossils are kept in the order of strata in which William Smith kept them and displayed them in his home in the Strand, and he would invite people to come and see them. He would even order other people's collections because people have been collecting fossils for a long time, But they didn't realise their significance, and he would put them in the natural order in which they occurred and say, well, these ones are younger and these ones are older, and this is how you should arrange them, because this is how they'll be useful.
Smith was a highly practical man, and the main application of his discoveries about strata and their fossils was to predict the location of mineral wealth under the ground.
He was able to advise landowners what the likelihood of finding coal on their land was, and people had wasted huge amounts of money thinking that they would be close to coal, but William Smith could identify that this was the Oxford clay, for example, and they had no chance of finding coal on their land.
Crucially, if Smith hadn't been working as a canal surveyor, he wouldn't have had the opportunity to properly test and develop his theories of strata.
There's a lot of guesswork in geology, and when you actually have a cutting, like they did for the canal, you have the evidence in front of you. The different strata, their lithology and their fossils are there before your eyes. So you might think, well, I wonder if this layer of rock is outcropping over there, but until you have the cutting, you don't know for sure. And he had a beautiful cutting all along the length of the Somerset Coal Canal.
Smith's groundbreaking table of the rock strata around Bath and their fossils was written down in 1799, giving birth to the area of geology known as stratigraphy. His discoveries are commemorated in Jerry Ortman's stone column sculpture, located near the ruins of the Coal Canal. It features the same types of rocks that Smith first sequenced over 200 years ago.
So Hugh, what was it about the West Country landscape that was particularly important for Smith's discoveries?
I think the first point is that Bath was a social centre. If you wanted to come to find a mistress, take drugs, alcohol, relax, you know, all the features of a modern holiday, Bath was the social scene, which meant that if you had a discovery, it was a good place to try and publicise it. Bath is a wonderful place to start geology because you can see as you go round that the top is very nicely horizontal, but the valleys are deeply incised. So just wandering around you can see that there's going to be a possibility of seeing things above and things below. And this ordering of the strata around Bath, 1799, is a really rather crucial document. And he said, people say that I have produced the birth of a new science, and if I have, I'd like to claim that Bath was its cradle, which is a rather nice way of saying that if it hadn't been a Bath, he wouldn't have been able to do what was done, because it wouldn't have been possible. You have to come to a place like this to see the rocks staring you literally in the face.
Smith's discoveries earned him the nickname of Strata Smith, and he spent many years in the early 19th century continuing to study rock layers and their fossils, while working all over Britain as a mineral surveyor and drainage engineer. In 1815, he put all his findings together and produced something of colossal importance, the world's very first National Geological Map, now celebrating its 200th birthday.
It took him 15 years on his own, tramping all over the British Isles to create a picture, not just of the pastures and the meadows and the mountains, but the hidden underneath, the subterranean marvels of the complexity of England and Wales. The thing about this map which makes it so extraordinary is that you can, from looking at it, you can predict where things are underneath. I mean, previously, if you were mining coal, you only did so where it appeared at the ground. Smith was able to say, from looking at the dip of the coal and where it was likely to be underground, that you could say, at this point, under Sheffield, say, I predict that 4,500 feet below me will be coal. And so they dug a hole, and indeed, coal was found. And so the whole British mining industry was created on the basis of geological maps like this. So whenever any mineral resource is found anywhere in the world underground, be it oil, or be it uranium, or be it platinum, we owe an enormous debt to this map and this man, because more than anything, this map enabled us to predict where the treasures of the world will be.
Smith's work also had a big influence on later thinkers, including Charles Darwin.
He began this map in 1800, effectively, when the common belief was that the Earth was only 6,000 years old. But Smith said, this isn't possible. I mean, these creatures that I'm finding in the walls of the canals that I'm digging are evidence that the world is hugely older than that, and that the variation within, let's say, a particular type of brachiopod or a particular type of ammonite was such that it triggered in Darwin, 50 years later, when he was doing his work, the variation that led to natural selection, which led to his book in 1859, The Origin of the Species. But essentially, Darwin's theories and discoveries were rooted in what Smith discovered.
Smith's 1815 map was an extraordinary feat for a single individual, but he endured some rocky patches in his personal life. Poor budgeting and bad business decisions left his finances in a precarious state. And when the sales of his map were damaged by plagiarised rivals, he was pushed into financial ruin. He lost his house and ended up in a debtor's prison. Gradually, though, his achievements began to gain more official recognition. The Geological Society, who initially turned their noses up at this interloper, born with limited education and no family connections, awarded Smith an honorary medal in 1831. Eventually, he was able to retire to Yorkshire on a government pension. He died in 1839.
Not for nothing is William Smith called the father of not just English geology, but the father of world geology. I think he's a remarkable, remarkable figure. And a terrible tragedy, I think, that he's so unsung. He should be more famous than Brunel. Brunel just built ships and chains. Give this guy a break.
And perhaps one day he will be. The discoveries of men like Smith certainly gave a big boost to the youthful science of geology. And throughout the 19th century, there was a growing interest from specialists and the British public in rocks and fossils. The Dudley Canal and its limestone mines became one of the nation's most geologically significant sites.
The rocks here are 420 million years old. They're from the Silurian period, and they formed on a shallow seabed. And that means that the rocks that we've got are absolutely full of fossils. There are thousands of different species here. There's a particular type of trilobite that's even known as the Dudley bug because it's found so much around here that it's sort of become synonymous with the area.
By the mid-19th century, the canal tunnel had gained an international reputation for its geology.
Because what they found in here was so interesting and so unique, it became a very interesting place for geologists to come and study. Amongst the mining that was still going on, you'd get sort of pleasure cruises almost of interested scientists, philosophers, engineers who would come and look at the marvel that was underground here. The massive caverns that had been taken out almost became a bit of a tourist attraction for the scientists who were interested in this new science of geology.
Geological forces produced the mineral riches that drove much of the activity during the Industrial Revolution. And it was no accident that the science of geology took great strides forward at the same time that canal men like John Rennie and William Smith were grappling with geological challenges.
It's amazing to think that the Canal Age didn't just shape the visible landscape around us, it helped us to gain a deeper understanding of what lies beneath our feet. And a great debt is owed to canal pioneers like William Smith.